Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Now, if you played any of Dragonflight healing at all, you'll know just how bursty and frustrating and annoying and how many videos I've made about it. So, here's the big question. Is the War Within Alpha's healing environment going to be any better than what Dragonflight gave us? And we have a little bit of an indication as to what they've been doing to making some changes. We'll talk about that. And some of the changes I think they still need to be making to make sure it's the best environment possible. So, real quick, for those who aren't sure why healing was a problem, basically, damage got enormously bursty in a Raid and a Mythic Plus environment, to the point that it's more about players using their defensives well, particularly in dungeons, and it's really important in a Raid environment to just like stack Raid cooldowns on top of each other and coordinate when everybody uses a personal to make sure that you survive and that you over heal through any potential mechanics that could be killing you. Raid overheal has gone through the roof. M+, I'm regularly overhealing like crazy, especially when I'm playing disc, because I feel like I have to just brute force output to make sure that people survive some of these massively bursty hits. So, the War Within, what are they doing about it so far? First thing that they're doing is they're massively increasing health pools. There's two factors to why the damage is crazy bursty. The first is survivability. It's a combination of HP and defensive power. So that's what defensive specs have on average. And then they tune the damage in accordance with that. They also tune it in accordance to the power that a healer has. What makes healers feel in general stronger is dependent on how quickly they can push up a health bar. Tanks feel stronger when they can spend more of their time alive, more of their time actively tanking. For healers, it's how quickly does the bar go up into the air. But when the bar can go up very quickly because there's a lot of cooldowns, there's a lot of bloat that a lot of healer specs have gotten throughout the Dragonflight talent trees, they want to make sure it feels strong. So all healers are pushing up health bars really fast, and that's when healers get those nerfs that we had throughout Dragonflight's expansion, where damage is still increased, but our health is increased, so it feels like it takes longer to top off. So what are they actually doing so far in the War Within? Well, they're massively increasing health pools. At level 80 in normal mode dungeons, I have like 3.2 million health. So with us being at level 70 in Awakened gear, I think we're around 1.1 million. So we're tripling it going into the new expansion. And we're not really substantially increasing in eye level, at least not at the moment. I think we were like 580-ish on the alpha at the moment, so it's not a huge power up in terms of intellect or primary stat that you're gaining, but it's a massive, massive jump up in stamina. This is a very similar strategy to what they did in Battle for Azeroth, because in Battle for Dazara lore, they increased the stamina that you got from Azerite armor as a way to sort of like slow down healing naturally. And then when the Essence system came around with the Heart of Azeroth, every time that you hit a new node with your Essence abilities, this is like kind of a borrowed power thing if you weren't familiar, you would just get more stamina along the way. And so you were having mass stamina gains throughout an expansion, which was really famous for borrowed power. You know, you're getting corruptions and Essence abilities and Azerite powers all on top of your base kit. And they did a pretty damn good job of making sure that healing was actually going to be slowed down in a raid so that all the raiders actually felt like they were pushing up health bars. And in a Mythic Plus environment, the damage wasn't as bursty, and you actually had some time to be able to react, top off some players before the next burst tries to kill you. There's also been a little bit of pruning for some of the defensive abilities going into the War Within. I think they rolled like Dampen Harm out for some of the monk specs, for example, to start reducing the amount of defensives on hand, but they haven't gone too deep in with the class trees just yet. A very, very large reason for why damage is so bursty is because basically Blizzard gives people tools to defend themselves, heal their allies, etc. And then they say, oh, well, they have access to all these defensives. Oh, you have access to these Shadowland legendaries, or these Covenant abilities, or this other passive that we decided to add in. So now we're going to tune the damage around it. And so the encounter designers are building encounters that are like burst after burst after burst that's threatening to kill you, and then you're just sitting around with this downtime where you're completely safe, and then, you know, these 5 or 10 second moments that could just wipe you out in an instant if you don't play perfectly. And thus far, they've done very little to prune down on the defensives that all of these specs are bringing to the table. In fact, it also gets a little bit power creepy if you look at the hero talents, in that some specs are getting, you know, magic damage DR just sort of caked or built into it. You're getting additional HP benefits or stamina benefits for taking some of these hero talents. And as a result, they're just gonna make the damage burstier and burstier. We're gonna repeat ourselves if something doesn't end up happening. So giving everybody all of these defensive abilities and defensive resources is bad, not only because they're gonna balance around that, but it's also bad because not everybody is able to maximize the performance of their defensives. The game has gotten more complicated with more abilities, more passives, more things to think about. And then when you hand somebody 3 or 4 different defensives that sometimes you want to use together, sometimes you want to break up separately, sometimes you have to use an ability like Thunder Focus Tea and you have to choose whether to spend it on a defensive with Expel Harm or for output with Essence Font, which obviously I know is being removed, right? There's a lot of different variety for how you can use these abilities, and then adding more to the equation just increases the skill cap, and then it just makes it even more jarring as a healer when some people know and some people have no idea how to use those defensives. You want a good example on live right now? Look at mages. I can't tell you how many mages who don't perfectly use all 4 of their cooldowns. Well, if you're giving some spec 4 defensives on hand, don't be shocked when not everybody or the average player isn't going to know how to perfectly use all of these things, but the elite will, and they won't have to run with a healer at all in some dungeons, leading to our latest MDI season where about half of the dungeons in the entire pool for the competition were just not running healers. By adding more defensives to every spec, by providing more utility and like off healing to all of these specs, it erodes the value of the healer and it turns them into maybe a 4th DPS in the way we saw it in like Shadowlands, or they just don't get brought at all in favor of an actual 4th DPS like we're seeing in Dragonflight. You need to be able to take away defensive power from players and also slow down healing through stamina increases and pruning down on some cooldowns for the healer specs that don't really seem to be able to add enough to the equation. I just had a video for Holy Paladin, for example, where I made the argument that they have way too many cooldowns, that they all don't feel good. And by taking those cooldowns away, it'll actually make the cooldowns that are left over feel important. So what's my dream, or what should Blizzard really do to make healing great? Well, there's a few different things. On the output side, they drastically need to be able to lower a healer's ability to push up a health pool for raiding, okay? Hear me out on this one. What you need to do is you need to balloon HP pools so that it's going to take a longer time for you to top off a health pool when you're playing with 4 or 5 healers. But at the same time, you need to actually have some agency as a Mythic Plus healer to be able to push up health bars on your own. Well, that's a conundrum, isn't it? I wonder if there's ever been a way they've been able to solve the problem. Well, they did. They did it with Disc Priest. Atonement just naturally does 50% more output. I think it's like 45% or 60%. They changed it recently, but they just did it. And it's been working in an effective way for 2 seasons now. Are you seeing mass bedlam or mass chaos or anything with Disc Priests? No, you're not. It's a system that works, and it is a great idea to actually spread this across the board. Because I think we're all tired of seeing certain raid cooldowns have increased output in 5-mans and certain cooldowns just don't. Looking at you, shamans, right? And as a result, it's immensely frustrating. Healers just need to be stronger and push up health pools faster in 5-mans, and they need to be slower and push up health bars slower when you're playing with 3 or 4 others in a raid, because you don't want to just sit around with nothing really to do or just mashing overheal for the sake of overhealing and trying to jump on and be first for output in a raid. And then in a 5-man environment, you're just kind of getting bodied by all the burst damage that is being tuned around healers playing perfectly with all their output and all the extra bloat cooldowns and using those perfectly, and all of your allies using their defensives perfectly to survive the many variety of one-shots to the equation. So by reducing the defensives for your group, by pruning healer output cooldowns, by ballooning health bars, and by making output separate between raids and M+, by having raid output naturally do less, and then healers having an atonement-like buff when they enter into a 5-man environment, whether it's doing 40 or 50% more healing, whatever it might be, when they enter into that dungeon, so they can push up health pools on their own. These things need to happen. Now, I know there's gonna be people who are saying, hey, well, naturally in infinitely scaling content like Mythic Plus, you're gonna get to areas where there's one-shots. You're going to get to those areas where people are dying. And you're right, I agree. But we're also 2 seasons in a row now, both season 3 and season 4, where you're very quickly being able to do 20s, or I guess they're 10s now, to be able to get your portals, which is supposed to be the top of the reward system outside of the 0.1% title. It gives you portals, it gives you best loot, and as a result, you're chesting dungeons without any agency as a healer. You are chesting dungeons with 10, 15, 20 deaths, and the mob HP is actually quite low. So the damage dealers and the tanks are able to kill all the monsters fast, but you're racking up all these deaths because the damage that the monsters are dealing to you is tuned so insanely high because it's designed and built around a Dragonflight talent system, which gave you a slew of resources, but the game as a whole, as we all know, does a very poor job of getting you to perfectly use the 50 keybinds you have. So yes, if they do all these things that I suggested, eventually we are going to reach a world where things are going to one-shot you. The difference is they're going to hit you at that 0.1% level, in which case, tough luck. Like, that's not who you're designing the game for, right? You should not be in this world as a healer where you just have such little agency over who lives and who dies, because when you're in a pug environment where you don't have coordination for how you stop avoidable damage, like interrupts, and you don't have control over how people are using their defensives, and when you can communicate to others that you have output to be able to muscle heal through a problem, and then you don't have output and you have to rely on somebody's off healing or have to rely on them using a health pot or a health stone or something to survive, it is immensely more difficult when more variables, more defensives, more off healing, things like that, are in the equation, rather than removing some of these things, pruning down on some of these things, and getting rid of the bloat, because then it's just going to increase the average skill level. Healing is an enormously complicated thing to be able to balance, unlike some of the damage dealers, and so I don't expect some of these changes to really happen overnight, but they've shown such like slow incremental progress on figuring out how to deal with this problem. In previous expansions like Legion or BFA, certain healers weren't really able to funnel their output, which was their output is balanced around a raid, and they weren't able to find good ways to sort of like shrink their output for a 5-man to be competitive. Some specs like druids with their mastery did an amazing job, when other specs like a shaman or a holy priest in Legion and BFA super struggled in those environments to be able to properly heal. They've done a much better job of balancing raids and 5-man output, and they can still do so, but they need to be on different scales. They can rise and fall together, but they need to be at different starting locations, because when you only have 5 people, you are responsible for pushing up those health bars pretty dang fast. When you're in a raid environment, when all you're doing is pushing up health bars fast, you're sitting around with not much to do, or even worse, you're in this environment where you feel like you're forced to overheal and forced to push output even when it feels like everyone's healthy, because the next hit, if somebody's at 95% HP, they could be in a supremely close position to be able to die. And so it's much better to just slam output on top of them and stack raid cooldowns together to make sure that somebody's going to be able to survive. I said it in another video, and I'll say it again here. Defensives not only is going to refer to damage reduction cooldowns, personals, but I think it also should be extending to externals and for raid-wide DRs. I think the reliance on things like Diva Aura, Barrier, and everybody and their mother kind of having like things like Rally, AMZ, all those things to the equation further sort of like complicates the pool for how they're designing damage. And honestly, I think that a lot of those are key areas to be able to prune down. They also make a really big difference in terms of who gets brought into raids, but maybe that's a video for another time. If you're enjoying this, or if you have some other ideas for how they could be fixing up healing going into the War Within, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. Hope you all watched this. Hope you all got through some of the more insane ideas that I've been proposing on this one, and I'll catch y'all next time.